But I also want you to respond to this. You recently said you do not think crime victims should be able to sue gun makers for damages. The daughter of the Sandy Hook Elementary School principal who was killed back in the 2012 mass shooting says you owe her and the other victims' families an apology. Do you?
What we need to do is to do everything that we can to make certain that guns do not fall into the hands of people who do not have them. Now, I voted against this gun liability law because I was concerned that in rural areas all over this country, if a gun shop owner sells a weapon legally to somebody and that person then goes out and kills somebody, I don't believe it is appropriate that that gun shop owner who just sold a legal weapon to be held accountable and be sued. But what I do believe is when gun shop owners and others knowingly are selling weapons to people who should not have them. Somebody walks in, they want thousands of rounds of ammunition, or they want a whole lot of guns. Yes, that gun shop owner or that gun manufacturer should be held liable.
So, Senator, do you owe the Sandy Hook families an apology?
No, I don't think I owe them an apology. They are in court today, and actually they won a preliminary decision today. They have the right to sue, and I support them and anyone else who wants the right to sue.
Well, I believe that the law that Senator Sanders voted for, that I voted against, giving this special protection to gun manufacturers and to dealers is an absolute abdication of responsibility on the part of those who voted for it. This is a unique gift given to only one industry in the world, as by the United States Congress. As Senator Murphy from Connecticut said, we have tougher standards holding toy gun manufacturers and sellers to account than we do for real guns. And the point that Senator Sanders keeps making about how he wouldn't want a mom and pop store, that was not the point of this. And if he can point to any incident where that happened, I would love to hear about it. What was really going on, I'll tell you, because it has a lot to do with New York City. New York City was on the brink of being able to hold manufacturers and dealers accountable through a very carefully crafted legal strategy. The NRA came to their supporters in the Congress and said, stop it now. And Senator Sanders joined
Thank you, Secretary. Senator,
let me just reiterate so there is no confusion. Decades ago, before it was popular, in a rural state with no gun control, Bernie Sanders said, let's ban assault weapons, not see them distributed in the United States.
Thank you, Senator. Let's turn it over to Errol Lewis of New York One, Time Warner Cable News.
Secretary Clinton, the 1994 crime bill that you supported added 100,000 police officers across the country and banned certain assault weapons. It also imposed tougher prison sentences and eliminated federal funding for inmate education. Looking at the bill as a whole, do you believe it was a net positive, or do you think it was a mistake?
Well, I think that it had some positive aspects to it, and you mentioned some of them. The Violence Against Women Act, which has been a very important piece of legislation, in my opinion. And it also did some things which were to provide more opportunities for young people. So if we were to have the balance sheet, on one side, there are some positive actions and changes. On the other side, there were decisions that were made that now we must revisit and we have to correct. I think that sentences got much too long. The original idea was not that we would increase sentences for nonviolent, low-level offenders, but once the federal government did what it did, states piled on. So we have a problem. And the very first speech I gave in this campaign was about what I will do to reform the criminal justice system and to end the overt mass incarceration. So I think that if all of us go back and look at where we were, Senator Sanders voted for the crime bill, and he said the same thing. There were some good things and things that we have to change and learn from. So that's how I see it. And I think we ought to be putting our attention on forging a consensus to make the changes that will divert more people from the criminal justice system to start, tackle systemic racism and divert people in the beginning.
Now, earlier this year, a South Carolina voter told your daughter, Chelsea, quote, "I think a lot of African Americans want to hear, you know what, we made a mistake." Chelsea said she's heard you apologize, but went on to say that if the voter hadn't heard it, then, quote, "it's clearly insufficient." Do you regret your advocacy for the crime bill?
Well, look, I supported the crime bill. My husband has apologized. He was the president who actually signed it. Senator Sanders voted for it. I'm sorry for the consequences that were unintended and that have had a very unfortunate impact on people's lives. I've seen the results of what has happened in families and in communities. That's why I chose to make my very first speech a year ago on this issue, Errol, because I want to focus the attention of our country and to make the changes we need to make. And I also want people, especially I want white people to recognize that there is systemic racism. It's also in employment, it's in housing, but it is in the criminal justice system as well.
Senator Sanders, earlier this week at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, you called out President Clinton for defending Secretary Clinton's use of the term super predator back in the 90s when she supported the crime bill. Why did you call him out?
Because it was a racist term and everybody knew it was a racist term. Much of what Secretary Clinton said was right. He had a crime bill. I voted for it. It had the Violence Against Women Act in it. But as mayor of Burlington, we worked very hard to try to eliminate domestic violence. This took us a good step forward. We're talking about the weapon that killed the children in Sandy Hook. This banned assault weapons, not insignificant. But where we are today is we have a broken criminal justice system. We have more people in jail than any other country on earth. And in my view, what we have got to do is rethink the system from the bottom on up. And that means, for a start, and we don't talk about this, the media doesn't talk about it, you got 51% of African-American kids today who graduated high school who are unemployed or underemployed. You know what I think? Maybe we invest in jobs and education for those kids, not jails and incarceration. And I'll tell you what else. I think. And that is we have got, and this is a difference between the secretary and myself as I understand it. We have got to have the guts to rethink the so-called war on drugs. Too many lives have been destroyed because people possess marijuana, millions over a 30-year period. And that is why I believe we should take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act.
Thank you. Let's get Secretary Clinton's response.
Well, look, I think that as Senator Sanders said about what I said, I will say about what he said. I think that we recognize that we have a set of problems that we cannot ignore and we must address. And that is why I have been promoting for my entire adult life, I think, the idea of investing early in kids, early childhood education, universal pre-K, like what Mayor de Blasio brought to New York. We have got to help more kids get off to a good start. That's why I want a good teacher in a good school for every child, regardless of the zip code that child lives in, and to be really focused on how we build ladders of opportunity and tear down these barriers that stand in the way of people
Secretary
getting
Clinton.
ahead.
Senator Sanders, I have a question for you related to this. So you've said that by the end of your first term as president, the U.S. will no longer lead the world in mass incarceration. To fulfill that promise, you'd have to release roughly 500,000 prisoners. How are you going to do that since the vast majority of American prisoners are not under federal jurisdiction?
We're going to work with state governments all over this country. And you know what? in a very divided Congress and a very divided politics in America, actually the one area where there is some common ground is conservatives understand that it's insane to be spending $80 billion a year locking up 2.2 million people. With federal and presidential leadership, we will work with state governments to make sure that people are released from jail under strong supervision, that they get the kind of job training and education they need so they can return to their communities. On this one, Errol, actually, I think you're going to see progressive and conservative support. We can do it if we're prepared to be bold.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Secretary. We have to take a quick commercial break. We have a lot more questions for Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders right after this.
On the next 80s.
Well, I have comments on this. I'm a little bit perturbed. Actually, I'm a lot perturbed that something so identifiable when it comes to the, let me pull it up, the act known as the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill. It is true, in July 2010, that Sanders, here's from the timeline, from the Bernie Sanders people, what he's worked, what he's done, all that good stuff. It says here in July 2010, Sanders works with Republican Congressman Ron Paul in the House to pass a measure as part of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Bill to audit the Federal Reserve, revealing how the independent agency gave $16 trillion, let me say that again, $16 trillion in near zero interest loans to big banks and businesses after the 2008 economic collapse. And we just heard former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton just beat Bernie Sanders on the head that he didn't support that bill. Or right there, he tried to amend it to get an audit of the Federal Reserve, which this did not pass, this amendment, by the way. He tried to do the right thing, but it's hard to do the right thing when all the senators, all the representatives from the House of Representatives are getting paid, and we're talking big-time payments. And Clinton was not immune to this. She happily, I shouldn't say happily, but she did accept donations on United Citizens, under United Citizens, which is crazy that they call it that. I'm just, later that year, in December 2010, Bernie Sanders, senator from Vermont, did this. As Republicans and President Barack Obama push a deal that would extend a Bush-era tax break for America's wealthiest families, Sanders gives an 8.5-hour filibuster-like speech on the Senate floor in opposition, citing growing economic inequality and increasing deficits. Yeah, this happens a lot. He speaks his mind. He talks about economic inequality. That's one of the downfalls of American society, to be honest. So she also accuses of him that he supported this, he didn't support that. She just distorts and twists the truth. It's called political spin. It's called the wrong thing to do. Let me take a look at my studio over here. All right, I'm doing my best that I can with the situations that I have when it comes to my audio. But I was shocked at the obvious, provable lies by former Secretary of State Clinton. I mean, how can they do this? I mean, honestly. Anybody can call into my show. The phone number is, 929-477-1696. Again, that call-in number, you'll need to push 1 if you want to join the conversation, so I can see the flag that you want to join. It's 929-477-1696. going to be able to simulcast on both Spreaker and Blog Talk Radio. Right now I'm just commentating. It looks like it's coming back.